LiberalViewer presents.
So, welcome to LiberalViewer Sunday Live Clip Roundup. Thanks for joining me. I've picked out, I think, 32 of the weekend's best clips for what should be an interesting show for you all tonight. As usual, my clips come mostly from the Sunday morning news analysis shows on the big five corporate outlets of ABC, NBC, CBS, CNN, and Fox News, what they call the corporate media here in the United States. And I'll also have several political comedy clips from last night's Saturday Night Live, though no Bill Maher this week because he took the week off. You can see the topics I'm covering down listed down in the video description, and if you're watching this as a recorded show, you should see time indexes down there to skip to the topics that interest you most. Tonight's biggest topic is the nuclear deal with Iran reached this week by the United States and other powers, and at least there's been this framework of a deal, and it is a big deal that this has happened, and I'll take a little over half of the clips on the show tonight to cover it. I'll also have a few quick clips on some Al-Qaeda affiliates having success in Kenya and Yemen last week. One follow-up clip on the perennial topic of Islamic extremism and whether religion or extremism gets more of the blame for its violence. Several clips following up on the topic of those so-called religious freedom laws in Indiana and now Arkansas and whether they allow discrimination. And at the end, I'll have a few clips on the issue of climate change and the California drought. But first, I want to show a few quick comedy clips on a couple topics covered on the Sunday shows, not today, but recently, that have come back as satire this week. In a moment, I'll have a couple on the Hillary Clinton so-called email scandal, but first, one clip on a topic that was big on the Sunday shows last week, but got no coverage this week, the Lufthansa Germanwings crash in the Alps. Although the airline disaster did get a lot of coverage during the week, especially on CNN, which Cecily Strong parodied with a little help from Sasheer Zamata on Saturday Night Live last night over in this clip.
The loose collection of daytime nonsense we call the CNN newsroom. That means you're either sitting in an airport or you're at home flipping through the channels and you've had a small stroke. Today's top story, as it's been for the last 11 days, the Germanwings airplane that crashed in the French Alps last week. Joining us now from Liverpool, France, is our own Jacqueline Jackson.
Good to be here, Brooke.
Jacqueline, can you tell us what exactly happened to that plane?
Even better, I can show you using one of CNN's patented animated reenactments. Now, apparently one of the pilots was locked out of the cockpit and couldn't open the door, which we believe looks something like this.
So that's what it would look like if someone couldn't open a door.
Correct.
Amazing.
If you've watched any CNN coverage like I have, that's a pretty funny parody of their silly animations. And there were a couple other good parodies of CNN animations in that Saturday Night Live segment that I'm not going to show you. But I also just had to include the way that segment parodied the Hillary Clinton email so-called scandal, again with Cecily Strong doing the CNN parody you can see over here.
CNN obtained a videotape that shows Hillary Clinton deleting her emails. Close, but that's actually not Hillary Clinton, it's a cat. We'll explain how after this.
That was actually kind of cute, and I don't know, I guess that's a different kind of keyboard cat. I've actually got an orange tabby cat that looks a lot like that one, though. I've never considered that he looks like Hillary Clinton, but I don't know, maybe with those pearls. But anyway, even though none of the Sunday shows, not even Fox News, covered the Hillary email thing this week, there was more news trickling out about it that I saw covered during the week, especially on Fox News, and which Colin Jost made fun of on Weekend Update on Saturday Night Live last night over in this clip.
Despite Hillary Clinton's claims that she used her personal email while Secretary of State to avoid carrying more than one device, a new report shows that she emailed with her iPad in addition to her BlackBerry. Even more alarming, her email signature was "sent from my Benghazi cover-up device."
Now, even though I keep calling this a so-called scandal, the premise of that last joke is true, at least from what I saw on Fox News this last week. Hillary Clinton did have both the BlackBerry and an iPad, so she wasn't putting everything on one device for convenience, though I'm not sure if she had the iPad at the beginning when she made that initial decision not to use a .gov email address, but my point is, just because there's no actual scandal that people will really care about so far, in my opinion, that doesn't mean there won't be plenty of fodder for those who want to keep it in the news, especially in the Fox News. But you can let me know what you think down in the comment section, because now I'm going to switch to the biggest topic of the broadcast, the framework of a deal the United States and other powers reached with Iran on its nuclear program and on sanctions against Iran. Though I want to start with another clip from Saturday Night Live Weekend Update last night, where co-anchor Michael Che actually, I think, made a kind of good point about this deal keeping Iran from getting nuclear weapons in comparison to some current members of the nuclear club over in this clip.
President Obama announced that a deal has been reached with Iran on their nuclear program that would lift sanctions and prevent the country from making a nuclear weapon, because nuclear weapons should only be in the hands of responsible nations like Britain or France or the country run by a Bond villain or Dennis Rodman's booty call or these human rights enthusiasts or the one country that's actually used them. That was only twice.
Oh, sorry about that little delay there. I dropped my clip list and I needed to know what my next clip was going to be for you, which is having shown sort of the parody and the comedy getting us into the Iran nuclear question. And I think that's actually an interesting point, like I said, that Michael Che raised there about why it is such a red line that cannot be crossed for Iran to get hold of a nuclear weapon compared to some of those other countries that, and he didn't even mention Pakistan. So I now want to go from that sort of serious comedic point to just the serious news. This is the report from ABC's Jonathan Karl over on This Week with George Stephanopoulos. Although George Stephanopoulos wasn't there this week, it was the guest host Martha Raddatz who turned it over to Jonathan Karl to report on what was going on with this whole Iran deal. And this is sort of a general news report. Pretty balanced, especially compared to the Fox News one from James Rosen I'll show afterwards, but here's ABC in this clip.
While the deal was greeted with cheers in Tehran, back in Washington, it's a much harder sell. President Obama made his latest pitch this weekend.
It's a good deal, a deal that meets our core objectives, including strict limitations on Iran's program and cutting off every pathway that Iran could take to develop a nuclear weapon.
The president has been working the phones, calling congressional leaders in both parties and a half dozen heads of state, trying to convince them this is the best way to keep Iran from getting a nuclear bomb. Many Republicans and some Democrats say the deal leaves too much of Iran's nuclear program in place.
This deal is going to threaten America's national security interests, and it's going to lead to a nuclear arms race in the most volatile region in the world.
Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is blasting the deal too.
Such a deal does not block Iran's path to the bomb. Such a deal paves Iran's path to the bomb.
So what does the U.S. get? Unprecedented inspections of Iran's nuclear facilities, a reduction in Iran's existing supply of nuclear fuel, and limits on Iran's ability to make highly enriched uranium. In return, Iran gets relief from economic sanctions, although exactly when those sanctions are lifted is still to be negotiated. Iranian President Hassan Rouhani says this deal is a first step towards more cooperation with the rest of the world. But first things first. this deal isn't even signed. It's just a framework agreement. Lots of details still to be worked out. For this week, Jonathan Karl.
So like I said, I thought that report from Jonathan Karl was pretty balanced. It showed some of the proponents of the deal giving reasons why there were a lot of things achieved, even more than people thought might be achieved. And then it also showed some critics. It showed Benjamin Netanyahu, and I'm going to have, I think, 4 actual interview clips from Benjamin Netanyahu in a moment. But first, I want to compare that ABC report on what happened with Iran to the one from James Rosen over on Fox News Sunday this morning, which really focused more on the negative, as you might expect, on the confusion and the problems and of course, Israel's objections over in this clip.
Chris, that Iran and the U.S. issued separate documents describing what was agreed to is sowing some confusion as to what in fact was. According to the State Department's fact sheet, Iran will reduce its installed centrifuges from 19,000 to about 6,000, roughly the number Iran had when Barack Obama became president, and other components of Tehran's enrichment infrastructure will be constrained.
Iran will no longer enrich uranium at its Fordo facility. Iran will not enrich uranium with its advanced centrifuges for at least the next 10 years. The vast majority of Iran's stockpile of enriched uranium will be neutralized.
Our facilities will continue. We will continue enriching. We will continue research and development. Our heavy water reactor will be modernized, and we will continue the Fordo facility. Inspectors from the International Atomic Energy Agency would enjoy weekly and monthly access to key sites, continuous surveillance at others, and would have the so-called suspicious sites, but not conduct snap inspections, and Iran would be able to dispute allegations of suspicious activity.
And these elements, as we've said, are the best hedge really against a covert path.
It's not good enough just to smother the known facilities with inspectors. You've got to have the ability to go anywhere at any time for that unknown, newly discovered or suspect facility.
Iran's foreign minister accused the U.S. of spinning the terms agreed to, saying in a tweet, Iran 5+1 statement, U.S. will cease the application of all nuclear-related secondary economic and financial sanctions. Is this gradual? The U.S. side maintained that sanctions relief will be phased, enacted in tandem with Iranian compliance.
And if we find at any point that Iran is not complying with this agreement, the sanctions can snap back into place.
The deal would greatly bolster Iran's economy. It would give Iran thereby tremendous means to propel its aggression and terrorism throughout the Middle East.
Deputy Secretary of State Tony Blinken is hitting the road as we speak, visiting 5 Mideast states over coming days, starting today in Lebanon. Chris.
So you noticed the last clip that they played in that story was Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu getting the last word, and I think that was more lopsided than the ABC report, more lopsided in favor of critics of the deal. But before I get to 4 clips from the biggest critic of the deal, Benjamin Netanyahu, who was on a few of the shows this morning, I want to show one more parody clip. This is from Weekend Update co-anchor Colin Jost on the show last night, making an analogy between the U.S.-Israeli relationship and another kind of relationship that viewers of Saturday Night Live might be more familiar with over in this clip.
There's concern in Washington that the nuclear deal with Iran is going to hurt relations between the U.S. and Israel. But our relationship is going to be fine. The U.S. and Israel are like buddy cops in an action movie. We were forced to be partners, we have very different methods of keeping the peace, and we blow up a ton of stuff in the process. Oh yeah, and one of us is getting too old for this bleep. And yes, I'm aware that Benjamin Netanyahu would probably be pretty upset that in this analogy, he's Mel Gibson. But he definitely wouldn't be as upset as Mel Gibson.
I thought that was kind of funny, although kind of the beginning of that premise where he said that the U.S.-Israeli relationship was like a buddy cop movie and that they were forced to be partners and use different methods. I'm not sure either of those are really true. The partnership between the U.S. and Israel that started in the 60s after the relationship between Israel and especially the French went south. That I don't know if they were forced to be partners, and I don't know if the methods that Israel uses used to be more harsh than what the United States did, but since September 11th, I don't know if that's been true for quite a while. But I don't know. You can let me know what you think down in the comment section about whether my analysis of that joke was accurate. I'm not sure why I'm spending so much time analyzing a Saturday Night Live Weekend Update joke, but I'm now going to show you 4 actual clips of Benjamin Netanyahu. First, over on NBC's Meet the Press, he was talking to Chuck Todd, who first welcomed him by wishing him a happy Passover, and then actually made like a quick little Passover joke. So I guess it's another comedy clip, even though it's from the actual shows, and then asked him about the deal and got a very long answer that he used on all 3 of the shows he was on that I'll talk about after you see it here.
Happy Passover. Welcome back to Meet the Press.
Thank you. Happy holidays to all.
I will have more than 4 questions for you. I promise you that. Let me start with this, which is, if this deal, you were going to be against perhaps any deal that didn't bring Iran down to 0 centrifuges. Why not let this deal get implemented even for just 6 months to see how the Iranians react to inspections, to see how this thing is implemented before trying to kill the deal?
I'm not trying to kill any deal. I'm trying to kill a bad deal. And you say it's a historic decision, a historic deal. It could be a historically bad deal because it leaves the preeminent terrorist state of our time with a vast nuclear infrastructure. Remember, not one centrifuge is destroyed. Thousands of centrifuges will be left spinning uranium. Not a single facility, including underground facilities, nuclear facilities, is being shut down. This is a deal that leaves Iran with the capacity to produce the material for many, many nuclear bombs, and it does so by lifting the sanctions pretty much up front. So Iran will have billions of dollars flowing to its coffers, not for schools or hospitals or roads, but to pump up its worldwide terror machine and its military machine, which is busy conquering the Middle East as we speak. The preeminent terrorist state of our time should not have access to a vast nuclear capability that will ultimately give them nuclear weapons. That's a concern for Israel, for the region, for the peace of the world.
Let me ask you this.
Now, just about everything Benjamin Netanyahu said there on NBC's Meet the Press, he also repeated when he was on CNN's State of the Union and ABC's This Week with George Stephanopoulos. I'm going to show a couple clips from those shows as well. The first one is over from CNN State of the Union, where the guest host this week, Jim Acosta, asked the Israeli Prime Minister about comments he made that this deal threatens the actual survival of Israel, which seems like hyperbole, especially since I think this deal actually lessens the threat to Israel. But here's Benjamin Netanyahu defending that statement over in this clip.
The region and the world.
And you said that it would threaten your country's survival. You stand by that?
Absolutely. If a country that vows to annihilate us and is working every day with conventional means and unconventional means to achieve that end, if that country has a deal that paves its way to nuclear weapons, many nuclear weapons, it endangers our survival. I'll tell you what else will happen. I think it'll also spark an arms race with the Sunni states because they understand exactly what I just said.
You know, let me ask you about that in just a moment.
This deal will both threaten us and threaten our neighbors.
Let me ask you.
Sorry, I was reading through your comments, the 100 of you about who are watching this as a live show, and I noticed someone saying they didn't get the Passover joke. That was the clip before last. Chuck Todd started off by saying he was going to ask more than 4 questions because the Passover service, the Passover liturgy includes this thing called the Four Questions, I think, or that's what Benjamin Netanyahu laughed at when Chuck Todd made that little Passover joke. So that's the Passover joke. I forgot to explain it for those people who aren't familiar with the Passover liturgy. Oh, and by the way, in honor of Easter, which I don't celebrate, I put a couple pink peeps in front of the new Jim Crow over there. That's not like any statement on peeps and racism or anything having to do with that, but I just thought I would point that out after explaining the Passover joke. But I want to show one more clip from Benjamin Netanyahu's interview with Jim Acosta on CNN State of the Union, where Jim Acosta asked him about his many predictions that Iran was about to get a nuclear weapon. This is one from 2012, his famous UN speech where he showed a picture of a bomb and claimed that by the summer of 2013 Iran would have a bomb, and of course now it's 2015, which leads to the question you can see from Jim Acosta over here.
Mr. Prime Minister, you know that your critics have pointed out that back in 2012 at the UN, you held up that picture of a bomb and talked about how close Iran was to acquiring a nuclear weapon. We have the video, we're showing it on screen. You said that Iran would have enough enriched uranium to make a nuclear bomb by the summer of 2013. Weren't you wrong about that, sir?
Plans to build a bomb?
No, it's in fact the application of the pressures exactly at that time that rolled Iran back. I think it proves exactly the point that I'm making here. If you press Iran strongly enough, what seems unrealistic today becomes realistic tomorrow. You know, if you said 2 years ago, if you said that the Syrian regime of Bashar Assad would remove all the chemicals from Syria, would destroy and dismantle and remove from Syria all the material and weapons making, chemical weapons that they had, you would have said that's unrealistic. You know, that would have been true then. But the application of subsequent pressure on Syria produced exactly the result that we need here. So what's unrealistic today with the sufficient application of pressure will become realistic for Iran tomorrow as well.
And
now, was it the application of pressure that got Syria to agree to that deal, or was it the fact that they separated that deal off from the previous policy that Assad had to go, and so they actually gave some legitimacy to the Syrian regime in exchange for getting rid of its chemical weapons, which is kind of what they're doing with the Iran deal. So that analogy is stupid, I think. And then the whole thing about how like it was his actual pressure that stopped Iran from getting the bomb the time he predicted, and that's not his only prediction of Iran getting the bomb that didn't come true. It reminds me of that old joke about the con man who's like selling the anti-elephant spray, you know, going around anti-elephant spray, and like one of the possible customers he comes up to says, well, we don't have any elephants around here, and he says, see how well it works? That's kind of what I think of Benjamin Netanyahu's answer to that question. And I have one more Benjamin Netanyahu clip before I move on to some other clips on the Iran nuclear deal. This is from ABC's This Week with George Stephanopoulos. Martha Raddatz also had on Benjamin Netanyahu. That's the three shows, ABC, NBC, and CNN. And she asked him why it is he's so against this deal and it threatens Israeli survival when President Obama and Secretary of State John Kerry are saying it's such a great deal. And you can see that over in this clip.
Netanyahu. Prime Minister, why do you think President Obama and John Kerry would want an agreement that, as you say, threatens the survival of Israel and paves the path to a bomb?
Well, I'm sure they think it's a good deal, but we differ. I think this is a bad deal. It leaves Iran with a vast nuclear infrastructure. It lifts the sanctions on them fairly quickly and enables them to get billions of dollars into their coffers. They're not going to use it for schools or hospital or roads, Martha. They're going to use it to pump up their terror machine worldwide and their military machine that is busy conquering the Middle East now. And third, it's a temporary deal. That is, whatever restrictions are placed on Iran's nuclear program, they're removed after a few years, and Iran will be free to have a vast arsenal with which to ultimately produce many nuclear bombs. I think for the preeminent terrorist state of our time, to have a free path, an easy path to nuclear weapons endangers Israel, endangers the region, endangers the world, endangers everyone listening to me right now.
That sounds pretty dangerous. Everybody seems to be in danger. And I guess that's because, like I said at the beginning of the Benjamin Netanyahu clips, he is one of the biggest critics of this Iran deal. Although all of the networks that had him on, I showed you NBC, CNN, and ABC, they also had people on who were in favor of this Iran deal. I was kind of surprised that Benjamin Netanyahu didn't go on Fox News Sunday. That seems like a natural place for him to get his message across. But don't worry, Fox News Sunday had on the Republican chair of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, Bob Corker, and they didn't have anyone in favor of the deal on. It was another one of those Sundays where no Democratic guests. I don't know, maybe Democrats during Passover and Easter can't appear on Fox News Sunday. I don't know if that's some rule, but anyway, I'm going to show first, even though Fox News Sunday did not have anyone in favor of the deal on the program, at least in terms of guests. They had Juan Williams later in the discussion, but the only person they had on as a guest to talk about it was Republican Senator Bob Corker, who was very skeptical. Chris Wallace, as host, did not ask very confrontational questions. I'll show one somewhat confrontational question at the end, but the first two are just sort of teeing him up to give his negative opinion about the deal, as you can see, for example, in this clip.
Senator, I know you have been briefed in some detail by top administration officials. What's your, and I understand it's a framework, but what's your initial reaction to what you've learned?
Chris, I did reach out to the Energy Secretary, and I've had 3 conversations with him over the last couple of days. I think it'd be very difficult for anyone to ascertain at this moment. As you just reported, in Iran, they're reporting the sort of the mirror image opposite of what's being reported here. And as you saw, Zarif has actually challenged Secretary Kerry for presenting talking points that are only intended to cause Congress to be pleased. So look, there's a lot of water that needs to go under the bridge here. Many details are unknown at this point, and so I don't know how anyone could really ascertain whether this is something good or bad yet for the American citizenry.
Now,
so since he can't ascertain whether it's good or bad, that you would assume he's not going to say anything negative about the deal, right? Well, of course, you're not assuming that, and I am going to show him point out 4 possible red flags when Chris Wallace again asks a very non-confrontational question. You can forgive him for that first one, just an open-ended question, but then this is later on, he's asking his follow-up, and it's more, open-ended, tell me what's bad about the deal, or point out any red flags, I think is the actual question over in this clip.
But Senator, Foreign Minister Zarif of Iran said yesterday that if there is no deal or if the West backs out, then Iran will be free to continue to resume. And now, there are some key issues that both sides agree haven't been settled yet. One of the questions is how fast the sanctions will be lifted. Another one is how quickly Iran could ramp up its centrifuge program after the initial 10 years. But let me just ask you, and I understand that you don't know all the details, are there any red flags that you see right now? Is there anything that, at least at this initial point, looks clearly unacceptable to you?
So there are 4 things I would lay out. First of all, as you mentioned, how will the sanctions be relieved? Iran is saying immediate, the U.S. is saying phased. And what are the elements that we're going to be looking at to alleviate those? Secondly, and very importantly, the covert activities. What are the SNAP types of inspections we're going to be able to do? What are the processes that are going to be in place? Is this going to create some long dispute? Thirdly, you refer to the document refers, not even in capital letters, to a nuclear development program that Iran has agreed to. It's my understanding that this has actually been written out, and yet none of us have been able to see that. And I'll just stop there. Those are three of the red flags. One more I'd mention. There's a process through which Iran is going to lay out their previous military dimensions, and yet it doesn't say when that process is going to begin, when it's going to end. Is this going to be done by the time that there's a final agreement? So those are some of the red flags. Again, I'm open. I know there are a lot of details that will be worked out over the next several months, and that's why, on behalf of the American people, Congress needs to be playing a role. What the American people may not know right now, Chris, is there'll be all kinds of classified annexes that are very important. They lay out the details as to how much of this is going to take place, and that's why it's so important that Congress play its rightful role in approving this prior to the congressionally mandated sanctions that we put in place are alleviated.
Well, let me.
So again, a very long negative assessment of this framework of a deal reached last week from a Republican, being the only voice in terms of a guest on the program on Fox News Sunday this morning. And the last clip of Senator Bob Corker I'm going to show is a little bit more of a confrontational question. I actually started playing this by mistake. I clicked on it and played like the first 10 seconds or so at the beginning of that last clip, and then realized my mistake and switched over to the correct clip. Here's a slightly confrontational question from Chris Wallace talking to Senator Bob Corker, but he uses the easy answer of a straw man, although even Chris Wallace's question, being slightly confrontational, includes him saying that President Obama claims sanctions don't work, which is not anything I've ever seen President Obama say. He actually credits the sanctions for how good a deal they got, and in the clip they show from President Obama to confront Senator Bob Corker, you won't see President Obama say that sanctions don't work over in this clip.
But Senator, Foreign Minister Zarif of Iran said yesterday that if there is no deal or if the West backs out, then Iran will be free to continue to resume and to build back its nuclear program. And President Obama says that sanctions, the existing sanctions prior to this negotiation, didn't stop Iran from developing its nuclear program, for instance, 19,000 centrifuges. And then the president said this.
Do you really think that this verifiable deal, if fully implemented, backed by the world's major powers, is a worse option than the risk of another war in the Middle East?
First of all, your reaction to Foreign Minister Zarif's comments about their ability to continue their nuclear program if the West backs out. And secondly, what about the president saying sanctions don't work, and if you kill this deal, we are going to end up with a war?
So look, there's always this straw man. As has been said, Chris, we'd be better off today with the interim deal continuing as it is today if we think that we're moving to a bad deal. One of the things that most Americans may not be aware of, but we'd be releasing about $130 billion to the Iranian government. Once we make this deal over time, their economy is going to flourish. So again, I think to pose this straw man of a war, the fact is that Congress has a rightful role to play in this. We know that we've already played a positive role. Going through this in detail and making sure that all the questions are answered is an appropriate thing for us to do. And that doesn't mean that there won't be a deal. We've just set in place a process to ensure that if there's a deal, it's a deal that will stand the test of time, that will keep Iran from getting a nuclear weapon.
So yeah, that still wasn't very much of a confrontational question from Chris Wallace, and he didn't really follow up much on it. And I pointed out that Benjamin Netanyahu was on 3 of the programs, all of which then had proponents of the Iran deal, and I'll show those proponents in a minute. But I also wanted to show you how CBS CBS's Face the Nation, hosted by guest host Norah O'Donnell this morning, how they dealt with the issue. They didn't have on Benjamin Netanyahu, but unlike Fox News Sunday, they did have one person from both, each side, a proponent of the deal and an opponent of the deal. The opponent is Senator Lindsey Graham, who I'll show in a moment. But first, I'm going to show a couple clips from the U.S. Secretary of Energy, Ernest. Let me make sure I get his. No, it's Ernest Moniz, I think is how you pronounce his name. And he was actually part of the negotiations. The Department of Energy covers nuclear plants in the United States, so they have a lot of expertise on nuclear facilities. That's why he was part of the negotiations, and he was on Face the Nation this morning talking about why this is a good deal to Norah O'Donnell in this clip.
I want to get your take on some of the news this morning. First, the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said just this morning that this is a bad deal. Listen.
Not a single centrifuge is destroyed. Not a single nuclear facility is shut down, including the underground facilities that they built illicitly. Thousands of centrifuges will keep spinning, enriching uranium. That's a very bad deal. And after a few years, Iran will have unlimited capacity to build unlimited nuclear infrastructure.
Secretary, technically speaking, is what the Prime Minister said true?
Well, we certainly have a very, very different view of the facts. First of all, today, the breakout time is about 2 months. This will immediately get us over a year. It will get us there with almost instantaneous recognition of any attempt to evade the deal, and it will give us plenty of time to respond diplomatically or otherwise. So we have blocked all of these pathways to a bomb, and we should also emphasize this is not a 10-year deal. This is a long-term arrangement. There's no sunset. There will be a lot of phases, starting with extremely stringent restrictions on Iran's program. Hopefully, they will comply for a long time, build up confidence. But we have 10-year restrictions, 15-year restrictions, 25-year restrictions, and we have forever restrictions. So this is a long-term program, not something that will kind of go away in a few years.
You just said hopefully they will comply. How will you know that they are complying?
We will know because this understanding leading to the agreement in 3 months will have built in unprecedented access and transparency. We will have eyes on, principally through the International Atomic Energy Agency, we'll have eyes on the entire supply chain of uranium, going back to the mines, the mills. We'll have continuous surveillance of centrifuge production. We'll have continuous surveillance of the centrifuge facilities themselves. We will have, by the way, for the plutonium pathway, we will have all of the spent fuel from the newly designed reactor, which produces much less plutonium. All that fuel will go out of the country. So there won't even be plutonium from that reactor in the country for the lifetime of the reactor. I repeat, the lifetime of the reactor. These are very, very strong. If they fail to meet any of these requirements, we are going to know through, again, our access and transparency, and that will immediately lead not only to us, but the international community, the P5+1, taking the appropriate actions.
So, yeah, that was a pretty strong defense from Secretary of Energy Ernest Moniz. I'm sorry, I mispronounced his name before I introduced that first clip. I have one more clip from the Secretary of Energy there talking to Norah O'Donnell. In this clip, he does a good job of refuting Benjamin Netanyahu's claim that this is a bad deal because it only deals with Iran's nuclear program and not its support of terrorism and destabilization of the Middle East, and you can see that over in this clip.
Mr. Secretary, Iran still remains a state sponsor of terror and will remain so. How would lifting of these sanctions, which would essentially deliver billions of dollars in new money to Iran, how can you justify that when Iran is the chief destabilizer in the Middle East?
Well, first of all, there's no question that we will have many, many more issues with Iran. You've mentioned them, terrorism, Syria, Yemen, you name it. This agreement in no way lessens the importance of our working against them, supporting our allies and friends in the region very, very strongly. The thing is, however, would we prefer to be addressing those with Iran having a nuclear bomb, or even the threat of having a nuclear bomb, versus a situation in which we have essentially complete confidence that they are either complying or face the consequences of noncompliance?
Now, that seemed like a pretty good point to me, that even though Iran still engages in behavior the United States doesn't like, that any of that behavior is mitigated by Iran having more time before it can get a nuclear weapon. Although I do sort of think back to that joke from Saturday Night Live that I showed at the beginning about from Michael Che about some of the other members of the nuclear club that don't seem to me to be that much more irresponsible than the country of Iran. Iran, I mean, it's only wars I can think of have been defensive. The one against Iraq, although it is a state sponsor of terrorism, and it does sponsor those organizations, Hezbollah and Hamas. Do I have that? I think those are both get some weapons from Iran. If I have that, I know Hezbollah, and I think there's a connection between Iran and Hamas. I think there were some ships and stuff that were embargoed, and if I'm remembering correctly. But I'm going to show, like I said, that CBS's Face the Nation also had someone against the deal, as you might expect, Senator Lindsey Graham, talking to Norah O'Donnell, who asked him about what you just saw from Secretary of Energy Ernest Moniz. And as you might expect, Lindsey Graham had a lot of negative things to say about the deal, and his solution to getting a better deal was, we need a better president, any president, even Hillary Clinton, although maybe not Rand Paul, which I thought was kind of amusing over in this clip.
Senator, you heard the Energy Secretary. He said this is the best option to prevent Iran from building a nuclear weapon.
Well, my view is probably the best deal that Barack Obama could get with the Iranians, because the Iranians don't fear or do they respect him, and our allies in the region don't trust the president. Here's the question for the world. Is there a better deal to be had? I think so. What I would suggest is, if you can't get there with this deal, is to keep the interim deal in place, allow a new president in 2017, Democrat or Republican, to take a crack at the Iranian nuclear program. Obama is a flawed negotiator. His foreign policy has failed on multiple fronts. Nobody in the region trusts him. The Iranians do not fear or respect him, so he'll never be able to get the best deal. The best deal, I think, comes with a new president. Hillary Clinton would do better. I think everybody on our side, except maybe Rand Paul, could do better. So that's one way of looking at this program, keeping the interim deal in place that's been fairly successful, and have a new crack at it with a new president who doesn't have the baggage of Obama.
So I guess Senator Lindsey Graham is not a fan of President Obama, and apparently not a fan of his colleague in the U.S. Senate, Senator Rand Paul. I thought that was kind of an amusing answer, so I thought I would share it with you. Now I want to skip over to CNN State of the Union, where Jim Acosta, having interviewed Benjamin Netanyahu to get the negative view on the deal with Iran, then had a couple positive, supportive comments from the senator from my state of California, Democratic Senator Dianne Feinstein, who is often very hawkish and takes views that I think are not very liberal, but in this case she's defending the deal, which I guess is the pro-peace position, as you can see, for example, in this clip.
Thanks for joining us this morning. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
I wanted to start with Prime Minister Netanyahu and what he has said about this deal. He says that this nuclear deal with Iran threatens the survival of Israel. Do you agree with that?
No, I do not. The surveillance and inspection and transparency runs 20 to 25 years for everything. All the centrifuges, rotors, the mills, the production facilities for yellow cake go out to 25 years of IAEA surveillance and inspection. So dependent upon how strong that is, and a precondition has to be that there's going to be a real rededication in the IAEA to do the kind of work that's going to be necessary to do 24/7, 365 days a year in the various facilities. But I think that having watched this for a long time and knowing this particular foreign minister, I think this is the best that's going to get done. It's a framework. It has to be wrapped into a final agreement. There still can be some changes, but I don't think it's helpful for Israel to come out and oppose this one opportunity to change a major dynamic, which is downhill, a downhill dynamic in this part of the world.
So, like I said, I thought that was pretty positive commentary from the Democratic senator from California, Dianne Feinstein, who often doesn't take very liberal positions, but made a good defense of the deal with Iran there. And one reason for that may be that most of the commentators I've seen talk about this deal have said that there's a lot more to it than many people expected. There are more concrete details and more concessions from Iran. Just about everyone, on the left and in the center, other than in the Fox News bubble, I've heard a lot of people say that it's better than expected. And Dianne Feinstein herself said that later on CNN State of the Union over in this clip.
Make it more difficult. I mean, a couple of years now have gone in to get this far, and it's a better agreement, candidly, than I thought it was ever going to be. I think that it can be a very serviceable, practical agreement, and it can signal a new day. Otherwise, we keep this dynamic going, which is not productive of anything that's positive for the region.
So, yeah, again, another good defense of this deal for peace instead of bombing Iran, which seems to be a better solution in my opinion. And now we're going to switch over to NBC's Meet the Press, where after having Benjamin Netanyahu on to trash the deal, they then had on another Democratic senator. This is Chris Murphy from Connecticut, and I'm going to show a couple clips. First, where he's reacting to Benjamin Netanyahu's claim it's a bad deal when prompted by Chuck Todd over in this clip.
A deal with Iran, Senator. Welcome back to Meet the Press. And let me ask you this. You heard Prime Minister Netanyahu, obviously he wants to see a better deal. Do you believe the United States should be negotiating for a better deal?
Well, I think we have a pretty remarkable deal on the table today. If you look at what our parameters were at the outset for a negotiated agreement, you can see the outlines of them right now. We've increased breakout time to a year. We've significantly rolled back their enrichment capability. We're dismantling the potential plutonium path at Iraq. And we have an inspections regime that is absolutely unprecedented, that is going to allow us to find a covert program if it exists outside of the known research facilities. The idea that we should just go back to the negotiating table and put back sanctions into place, I think doesn't understand the reality, which is that with this deal on the table, it would have been hard to get our partners, especially Russia and China, to go back to sanctions when most of our objectives had been met at the negotiating table. It's easy to say that we should just continue to negotiate and effectively sanction Iran into submission. I don't think that that's the deal that the rest of our negotiating partners signed up for, and that's the reality that we have to deal with.
So that's a good point, that it's not just a negotiation between the United States and Iran. Some of the other powers involved, it's not just Europe, it's and Russia, I guess, is also a European, also, and an Asian power, and then China. So there are a variety of interests, and if the U.S. had not taken a deal this good, then the other partners in the negotiation whose sanctions are as important or more important than the U.S. sanctions might not have kept their sanctions on anyway. So this is the best point to get to the deal. And then Chris Murphy, the senator from Connecticut, also addresses the point about how this deal is only about the nuclear program and not the support of terrorism and destabilizing the region. This is where he says that that's not what the negotiation was supposed to be about, and also that this might be a way to open the door to helping those problems. In the last clip I'm going to play of the 18, I think it was, I showed on the topic of Iran and the Iran deal that was reached in framework form this last week over this clip.
Senator, what about the Prime Minister's point, and frankly the point of others? We're not asking Iran to stop supporting terrorism. We're not asking Iran to change its behavior. We're about to hand them more resources, and they've been doing nothing, arguably, but expanding their sphere of influence in the Middle East. Now you're giving them more money to do that by lifting the sanctions, and we didn't ask for a behavior change on anything other than nuclear inspections. Did we just ask for too little?
Well, it's true that this deal doesn't turn Iran from a bad guy into a good guy, but it's a little bit of rewriting of history to suggest that these negotiations were about all of the other nefarious activities of Iran in the region. These negotiations were about ending their nuclear program such that we can start to lift up the moderate elements within Iran, the internationalists who want them to be sitting as a member of the world community, so that we can talk about all of these other issues. And it's also important to point out that we have a host of other sanctions that are in place trying to change their behavior on their ballistic missile program, on their human rights violations, and on their support for terrorism. Those sanctions don't go away. They stay in place, and Congress and the President reserves the right to increase those sanctions if they continue to undermine stability in the Middle East, notwithstanding the progress we're making on their nuclear program.
So you support, let me get this straight, you support potentially increasing sanctions if you connected to their support, say, of the Houthis in Yemen, but pulling back some sanctions that are connected to the nuclear program.
So we have sanctions in place that don't go away, that are connected to these other activities. And I think Congress always reserves the right to change our policy vis-a-vis Iran if they continue to act in the way that they are in the rest of the region. So absolutely, we reserve our right to continue to try to use whatever levers that we have at our disposal to try to make them less of an evil within that region.
So as you can see, even those people who are supporting this nuclear deal with Iran are not necessarily supporters of Iran or even peace with Iran, which is a little problematic or troublesome to people who want to avoid additional wars in the Middle East, I guess. But at least this deal, if it's successful, will put off the possibility of either the United States or Israel bombing nuclear facilities in Iran for at least another decade, maybe. That's good news. And in the reverse of good news, bad news, I guess, I want to show a few quick clips on some gains that Al-Qaeda made, or some successful Al-Qaeda affiliates in Kenya, with this awful attack on a college there, where since I watch a lot of Fox News, they pointed out that Christians were targeted at this college or university in Kenya with an Al-Shabab attack. And then there was also this prison break in Yemen. I'm going to show a few clips on this. The first one is an extended report from ABC reporter Brian Ross on This Week with George Stephanopoulos this morning, over in this clip.
Week of attacks, arrests, and anarchy that raise questions of whether the anti-terror strategy of the U.S. and its allies is up to the task.
The new threats come from the same al-Qaeda-connected terrorist in Africa, who this week killed 148 people, mostly students, at Garissa University College in Kenya. Christians were executed on the spot, according to survivors.
The gunshot continued, and this made us to run to the fence so that we can get our way out from the school.
The massacre was carried out by the group called Al-Shabab that the U.S. has been targeting for years in its home base of Somalia. But the scenes of carnage made it clear whatever is being done to stop Al-Shabab has not succeeded. At home, the FBI is claiming it succeeded after the arrest of 2 young women in New York who agents said idolized Al-Qaeda and ISIS, studied bomb-making online, and wanted to be part of what they told an undercover agent would be the last war, the big war, Armageddon, inside the U.S. Neighbors in Brooklyn expressed shock.
It's incredible. I can't believe it.
But nothing this week concerned U.S. officials more than the anarchy in Yemen, where Al-Qaeda carried out a massive prison break, freeing some 300 of its fighters. One of the escapees even posted pictures of himself inside a plush palace office in the area. No group poses a more direct threat to the U.S. than the Al-Qaeda in Yemen network. Its evil genius bomb maker has repeatedly targeted U.S.-bound aircraft with bombs hidden in shoes, underwear, printers.
So there's no reason to think that that hasn't stopped. In fact, given the situation in Yemen, I think we have to be concerned that they're able to make those arrangements, make those plans without any real interference from Yemeni security forces because of the chaos inside that country.
So that report from Brian Ross was pretty scary. You know, the evil genius. They actually called someone there an evil genius, but the Al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula, AQAP as they call it, that's in Yemen, one of the consequences of the civil war, there was one possibility that the Houthis, who are Shias, would actually do a better job of suppressing AQAP because it's Sunni, and so the Houthi Shias are against the Sunni Al-Qaeda affiliate, but apparently they were able to use the chaos to get all these, like a couple hundred fighters out of jail, and well, who knows where that's going to go. But of course, as I've shown over many programs, the Sunday morning shows, especially this week with George Stephanopoulos, likes to hype some of these threats maybe a little more than they deserve. At least they've predicted or warned of things that haven't yet occurred, I guess. But I want to show a subsequent clip from the same show they had on Democratic member of the House Intelligence Committee, Adam Schiff, where Martha Raddatz asked him to give any updates he had on either of these incidents, either in Yemen or especially in Kenya. And here's what he said in this clip.
And I want to start with you, Congressman Schiff, and tell us what you know about the latest concerning Yemen and Kenya.
Well, in Yemen, the news is really all bad. Just as we feared in the chaos between this fight with the Houthis and now the Saudi intervention, Al-Qaeda has had a resurgence. They've taken over the 5th largest town in Yemen, sprung Al-Qaeda operatives from prison, a couple hundred people. We're still trying to ascertain just who was released in that prison break. They've also taken over part of a bank and now have added financial resources. So that chaos is providing just the kind of fertile ground and environment for AQAP to grow again.
Is it a safe haven now?
Now, if you thought those two clips from ABC were scary on hyping or maybe just presenting this threat from Al-Qaeda, both the Al-Shabab group from Somalia attacking this, I guess they called it a university college in Kenya, and attacking these Christians, and then the Al-Qaeda affiliate AQAP in Yemen successfully having this prison break. Over on Fox News Sunday, they had on the Archbishop of Washington, D.C., Cardinal Donald Wuerl, if I'm pronouncing his name correctly. And, of course, on Fox News Sunday, because there were Christians attacked in Kenya, and there have been some other attacks on Christians that you'll see described in detail by the host Chris Wallace, they framed it a little differently from ABC. Over on Fox News Sunday, they were talking about this widespread attack on Christianity across the Middle East. I'm not making that up over in this clip.
Let me switch to another very difficult subject this Easter weekend. Christians are being hit across the Middle East and in Africa. In Kenya, the Al-Shabab terror group killed 147 targeting Christians. In Libya, ISIS beheaded 21 Egyptian Christians. In Syria, they kidnapped 200 Assyrian Christians. Cardinal, ISIS talks about conquering Rome, their phrase. Is Christianity under attack at this moment?
I think it's fair to say that. When you look at all of these incidences, I think they're all directed at Christians. What just happened in Kenya, I'm told, what I heard on the media was that those assassins went in and they separated the Christians from the Muslims and killed the Christians. This is something that the whole world should be shouting out about. The whole world should be rejecting this.
But you know, shouting out and rejecting isn't enough, and I want to ask you about that because Pope Francis says that it is, quote, lawful to stop an unjust aggressor. So what do you do in the case of ISIS? Is it moral to use force? Is it a just war to stop ISIS?
What the Holy Father said, I think, is absolutely true. It's also common sense. Everybody knows that you can defend yourself against an aggressor. All you have to do is try, even with a child, to smack the child. The child's hand is going to go up to protect itself. Why? It's instinctive in us to stay alive. And so everyone has a right to defend their life. What's happening with ISIS, what's happening with this idea of a caliphate, is simply taking intolerance and hatred and violence to a new institutional level. And yes, everyone has a right to defend themselves, and institutions have a right to defend themselves.
Now, he didn't really talk about hatred there, but the fact that they were institutionalizing violence according to religion, I thought that the Cardinal was accusing ISIS of doing that. I thought was a little bit hypocritical, because at the same time he was answering that leading question from Chris Wallace about, you know, it being the war against ISIS being a just war, and he was saying basically that religion, among other things, would justify it. Even a child knows that you can justify self-defense. But I mean, there is, as I'm not saying self-defense isn't justified, but he was using religion to justify possible violence in that case. Which is what he was accusing ISIS of. And I'm going to sort of flip it here in a clip I have from a different cardinal. This is the one clip I'm putting under the topic of Islam and whether Islamic extremism is the violence that Islamic extremists partake in, if it's more the fault of their extremism or their Muslim beliefs. And this is a clip from the Cardinal from an Archbishop of New York, Timothy Dolan. He was over on NBC's Meet the Press, and he started off answering a question about all the violence in the world right now that's a result of religion, and gave this weird answer, weird in my opinion, about the response being that we need more religion in the form of Passover and Easter because that religion's so much better and whatever. Then he goes into this sort of defense of those who say that Islamic extremism is not the fault of Islam over in this clip.
I began by pointing out a disturbing trend, that it seems more people are killing or dying in the name of God than at any time in recent memory.
Well, I say you're right, and I do think it's worse than it has been in centuries. And I think, to me, that only says we need Easter more than ever. Passover and Easter are all about good triumph, the good's triumph over bad, life's triumph over death. And do we ever need that? It is an amazingly tragic and poignant scandal that some would claim to use religion in the name of these atrocities. My boss, Pope Francis, has been extraordinarily articulate in reminding us that anyone who claims to use religion as a cause of hatred and division and bloodshed is perverting the role of religion. Religion, by definition, is about bringing people together, affirming. It's about life, it's about friendship, it's about reconciliation. To use religion for anything different than that is simply put a perversion. And so religious people are suffering in numbers that we're not used to. Right. And often it's who are the perpetrators? People who claim to be acting on behalf of
and they have
another
such
perverted.
deep faith.
They have a passion.
In some ways, scarily so. I don't know, is it faith, is it passion?
Well, they have strong conviction, whether it's consonant with the faith they profess. That we know is not true. I mean, even especially with the Islamic fanatics, temperate voices of Islam, and thanks be to God there are many, would remind them that they are not acting loyal to the teachings of the Quran. What do we say, though, Chuck? Well, we know from the human experience, not just religion, we know that most battles, most bloodshed is caused by things that we feel passionate about.
What'd you
So I thought that there were some weird convolutions to that answer from the Cardinal from New York, Timothy Dolan. And one thing that struck me about it was the way that he condemned people who use religion to justify bloodshed, it being a perversion. But didn't the Cardinal right before him from Fox News Sunday at least justify self-defense, use religion to justify self-defense and just war, to go up against ISIS at the prompting of Fox News Sunday host Chris Wallace? Not that I, like I said, not that I disagree with the right of self-defense, although, you know, when you're going and bombing people in a place where they live and you don't live, you have to give a little bit more reasoning before you get to just say self-defense and have it make sense, I guess. But I want to leave the topic of Islam and Al-Qaeda and Iran and move on to sort of a follow-up to an issue I covered both in my LiberalViewer First Wednesday show. I actually dedicated almost the entire show to the issue of religious freedom, so-called religious freedom laws, RFRA, which is Religious Freedom Restoration Acts, and the one in Indiana that has been fixed, I guess, and it seems to be pretty fixed, I guess, from the language I've seen. And then Arkansas, the governor of Arkansas just signed a modified Religious Freedom Restoration Act bill that may or may not discriminate. I actually haven't read the Arkansas bill, but I'm going to start off with a general summary of the issue and what happened in the last week from NBC's Chuck Todd on Meet the Press this morning over here.
Over so-called religious liberty or freedom legislation in Indiana and Arkansas marked a new round of the culture wars, with liberals, LGBT activists, and the big business wing of the Republican Party pitted against evangelical conservatives. And this leaves Republican 2016 presidential hopefuls in a tricky situation, having to work out how to satisfy the evangelical base of the party without alienating more socially liberal general election swing voters.
This bill is bipartisan. It has received overwhelming support in both houses. It protects religious freedom.
After a backlash from LGBT activists and business leaders and sports leaders and the public, Republican governors in Indiana and Arkansas signed revised religious freedom legislation into law on Thursday. The new language in Indiana spells out that the law does not authorize a provider to refuse to offer or provide services on the basis of sexual orientation or gender identity. Arkansas's new legislation mirrors a 1993 federal law signed by Bill Clinton and will make it harder for private individuals or businesses to cite religious freedom as a way to avoid providing services for same-sex weddings. Social conservatives call the compromises a cave.
It's the worst act of political malfeasance I've seen in my lifetime.
The hypocrisy from the corporate America is quite amazing to me.
It's only the latest skirmish in a battle between big business and social conservatives that's exposing fault lines within the Republican Party. It's also forcing potential 2016 presidential candidates to do a tricky two-step: avoid alienating evangelicals while also not appearing intolerant and scaring off general election voters. Former Florida Governor Jeb Bush tried that two-step this week and tripped. On Monday, he praised Indiana Governor Mike Pence on conservative radio.
I think once the facts are established, people aren't going to see this as discriminatory at all.
But by Wednesday, Bush appeared to backpedal, telling donors in Silicon Valley, religious freedom is a core value of our country, but we shouldn't discriminate based on sexual orientation. So what the state of Indiana is going to end up doing is probably get to that place. Meanwhile, 2016 hopefuls eager to catch fire among social conservatives are seizing the opportunity to criticize their own party.
Fortune 500.
is running shamelessly to endorse the radical gay marriage agenda over religious liberty. Sadly, a whole lot of Republican politicians are terrified.
We've seen a lot of Republicans run for the hills when the left comes out and starts to hammer.
It won't stop until there are no more churches.
All this is happening as Americans grow increasingly comfortable with same-sex marriage. The next fight may be in Louisiana, the 17th state to introduce religious freedom legislation this year.
I thought that was a pretty interesting report from Chuck Todd on NBC's Meet the Press this morning, revealing the two-step that Republicans have to do to appeal to their base now, but keep themselves open to the general election. And there were a few in there who don't seem to care about keeping themselves open to the general election, including, I noticed there was that clip of Ted Cruz talking about the radical gay agenda, which isn't something I've heard for a while. I thought that kind of had died out, but apparently not. And there were a couple of those more right-wing Republicans, more evangelical Republicans on the shows this morning who I want to show. First, also from NBC's Meet the Press, Chuck Todd had on the governor of Louisiana, Bobby Jindal, who may be running for president and may be appealing to that evangelical wing. It seems from the answers he gave in the two clips I'm going to show. First, you can see Chuck Todd introduce him and ask him about, whether businesses should be allowed to discriminate, and the issue over in this clip.
Thank you for having me back.
Well, let me ask you this. Do you agree with some other social conservatives that you think Governors Pence and Governors Hutchinson in Arkansas and Indiana have essentially caved to too much pressure?
Well, Chuck, I was very worried about the law in Indiana. I'm disappointed. Let's remember what this debate was originally all about. This is about business owners that don't want to have to choose between their Christian faith, their sincerely held religious beliefs, and being able to operate their businesses. Now, what they don't want is the government to force them to participate in wedding ceremonies that contradict their beliefs. They simply want the right to say, we don't want to be forced to participate in those ceremonies. So I was disappointed that you could see Christians and their businesses face discrimination in Indiana. I hope the legislators will fix that, rectify that. Chuck, there used to be a bipartisan consensus in this country around religious liberty, saying that as Americans, we don't all have to agree with each other, but we should respect each other's rights and freedoms. And that's what this debate is really about. Are we going to use government to force people to contradict their own sincerely held beliefs?
Well, the debate.
Now, you notice in that answer how Governor of Louisiana, Bobby Jindal, reframed the idea of denying services to LGBT people or, anyone, because these same laws protect people against racial discrimination and ethnic discrimination and gender discrimination. So any of those might be used in the type of argument that Governor of Louisiana Bobby Jindal was making there. But you notice how he changes the idea of denial of service to people not wanting to participate. Like if you send flowers or food to somebody's wedding, you're somehow up there marrying the two of them. But that seems a little bit of a stretch, but he continues to make that stretch much, and sticks with it and doubles down on it when Chuck Todd specifically asks him if people should be able to deny services to gays and lesbians over in this clip.
Well, the debate, I guess, is about the line on freedom and a personal conviction versus how you conduct yourself in a business. So you think it's okay, based on religious conviction, for a business to deny services to a same-sex couple?
Well, Chuck, we're not talking about restaurants denying service to people who want to come and have dinner. We're not talking about day-to-day routine commercial transactions. We're talking about a very specific example here of business owners, of florists, of musicians, of caterers who are being forced to either pay thousands of dollars or close their businesses if they don't want to participate in a wedding ceremony that contradicts their religious beliefs. So in that instance, yeah, I think part of the First Amendment means that we allow individuals to obey their conscience, to obey their religious beliefs.
As you
So yeah, like I said, the whole thing is based on changing the denial of service into the refusal to participate. And I mean, at some point, like I don't think that you can force priests and rabbis and or whatever imams to perform same-sex marriages. That isn't actual religious institutions and religious officials should be exempt from these types of laws. And I think that churches, for example, should be able to hire only for there's something called the ministerial exception that's a part of constitutional law already under the First Amendment that says that certain interior doctrinal and internal matters of churches are outside the reach of the law. Sometimes I think those go a little far and like allow child abuse and gender discrimination, and some of that actually came up in this Scientology documentary that was on HBO last Sunday, I noticed, where they talked about how the government, once Scientology got the religious exemption from the IRS, the government stopped investigating them for these like worker abuses and other abuses because religions are allowed to abuse people apparently. And the scandal in the Scientology documentary, I think it was called Going Clear, was that Scientology was allowed to do this, I guess. But isn't the real scandal that like if you get a religious exemption, all of a sudden you are allowed to like abuse your workers and break all these other occupational, worker safety, well, I guess not worker safety, but at least worker fairness laws. I think that is a little bit of a scandal. But anyway, that's the... I have one more clip. This is over on CBS's Face the Nation. I wanted to show one other Republican who may be running for president. Bobby Jindal might be running for president, and this is another person who may be going after the evangelical vote. This is Senator Rick Santorum. Talked to Nora O'Donnell on CBS's Face the Nation and tried to also turn this into a religious freedom issue over in this clip.
In fact, here's what the language says. It makes clear that the law does not allow businesses to refuse services, facilities, use of public accommodations, goods, employment, or housing to any member or members of the general public based on race, color, religion, ancestry, age, national origin, disability, sex, sexual orientation, gender identity, or United States military service. With this language, if you were a wedding planner and you did not want to be involved in planning a same-sex marriage, this language would not allow you to opt out.
I'm not a legal scholar, but I can tell you the way that the previous laws have been ruled, that they have not provided any type of legal protection for that. And I think that's...
And you think that wedding planners who don't want to plan a same-sex marriage should be allowed
Again,
to...
It's a matter of accommodation. Tolerance is a two-way street. If you're a print shop and you are a gay man, should you be forced to print God hates fags for the Westboro Baptist Church because they hold those signs up? Should you be forced to do, should the government, and this is really the case here, should the government force you to do that? And that's what these cases are all about. This is about the government coming in and saying, no, we're going to make you do this. And this is where I think we just need some space to say, let's have some tolerance, be a two-way street.
I like that Westboro Baptist Church analogy because it didn't sound to me like Rick Santorum stumbled at all when he was using the gay F word there. Sounds like a word he may have used before, but I don't know. You can let me know what you think down in the comments section. I also don't think that a printer can be required to take a particular job. Like if you wanted a printer to print profanity or to print, printers aren't covered by the First Amendment in terms of not being allowed to censor the content of jobs that they take. So I think that any printer can decide not to print signs with the gay F word on them if they don't want to, right? I don't know. I haven't really thought about it, but my initial impression is that private printing establishments do not have to take jobs that include printing big signs with words on them that they don't want to print. But I want to move on to one last topic before I finish the show tonight. And I'm reading the comments along the way from, I think we got up to about 135 people. There are about 130 still watching for this last topic of climate change, and always an important topic. I want to show a few quick clips at the end here. A couple from my governor, Jerry Brown, who was talking about climate on a previous show recently, and especially the drought in California. And before I show him talking about that over on ABC's This Week with George Stephanopoulos, I want to show a report on the drought, a little bit on climate change, but mostly on the California drought, from ABC reporter Kendis Gibson, focusing specifically on an agricultural town in California having problems in this clip.
It's a stark new reality for Californians. A 4-year drought so bad, for the first time, mandatory water restrictions are now in place.
The idea of your nice little green grass getting lots of water every day, that's going to be a thing of the past.
These startling images show how quickly and severely drought conditions expanded in 2 years. Before and after pictures show the reality. Places where water was plentiful, now no longer. Here's a perfect example of the problem. The water line for this lake just north of LA used to be way up there. Now take a look. It is all the way down there, 135 feet lower. The drought, a living nightmare for residents of Porterville, many who rely on private wells. No water to do dishes, shower, or even flush toilets.
Our well is dry.
How long ago did it run dry?
10 months ago.
That sounds
horrible.
The city now delivers water rations once a week. You're their lifeline.
Guess you could say that.
State officials trying to prevent those extremes from spreading. Californians now ordered to reduce water consumption by 25%. Golf courses and other large landscapes forced to restrict watering or face hefty fines. But critics point out the agricultural industry, responsible for 80% of California's water consumption, left mostly spared by the new restrictions. For This Week, Kendis Gibson, ABC News,
So I thought that was a good report from ABC's Kendis Gibson, especially that last part there where he talked about how all the water restrictions are on this personal and business and, golf courses and landscaping, but not California agriculture, which uses like 80% of the water. And I showed some clips on a previous show, Bill Maher talking about how almonds, which are grown in California, it's like a gallon of water per almond. And over on the interview after that piece ran, Martha Raddatz had on Governor Jerry Brown and confronted him with the wasteful water used by agriculture and the lack of restrictions in his mandatory, rationing plan. And his answer, I don't think, it didn't satisfy me. It sounded more like he needed to kowtow to big agriculture here in California, but you can let me know what you think after you see his answer to Martha Raddatz here.
You have to change it substantially.
Governor, one of the criticisms of this executive order has been that you did not make the same demands on the agricultural industry, which certainly has enormous political clout in the state. Look at a couple of headlines. Los Angeles Times, Brown's drought plan is light on growers. Sacramento Bee, growers largely spared in new water restrictions. And a few factoids floating out there. Agriculture uses 80% of the water, but accounts for less than 2% of the economy. More water used for almond production than is used by all residents and businesses in San Francisco and Los Angeles combined.
I'm glad you used the word factoid, because it certainly has that character. Look, the farmers have fallowed hundreds of thousands of acres of land. They're pulling up vines and trees. Farm workers who are at the very low end of the economic scale here are out of work. There are people in agriculture areas that are really suffering. We're providing food, housing
we know they're
relocation.
suffering, Governor, but let me look at those again. 80% of the water used by agriculture, but accounts for less than 2% of the economy. Is that true?
Yeah, you bet it's true. But by the way, they're not watering their lawn or taking long showers, providing most of the fruits and vegetables of America, a significant
But is
part
there
of the world.
something wrong there if you're using that much water for almond production? Let me read you something else from The Economist. If water were priced properly, it is a safe bet that they would waste far less of it, and the effect of California's drought would not be so severe.
Most of that is true in the sense that anybody who's wasting water in not using the latest technology, that's not very smart. But farmers are getting zero allocation from the federal Central Water Project. That's a big deal. That hasn't happened before. Now, of course we could shut it off. If you don't want to produce any food and import it from some other place, theoretically you could do that. But that would displace hundreds of thousands of people, and I don't think it's needed. There are farmers who have senior water rights. Some people have a right to more water than others. That's historic. That's built into the legal framework of California. And yes, if things continue at this level, that's probably going to be examined.
Governor, what?
Well, if things continue at this level, that's probably going to be examined. That's the closest he came to putting any or considering any restrictions on agricultural water use in California. And I don't think that answer really was a sufficient reaction to the facts that Martha Raddatz did a good job of confronting the governor of California, my governor there with, I think. But you can let me know what you think down in the comment section. And before I go, I have a quick clip, one more quick clip of Jerry Brown. Having shown a clip where I did not like what he said very much, I wanted to at least give him credit for speaking the truth about climate change in the midst of our drought here in California. And that's the last clip of the night I'm going to show over here.
But remember, the weather that's happening in California, that weather will be reflected and show up in other parts of the world. I can tell you from California, the climate change is not a hoax. We're dealing with it, and it's damn serious.
Governor, thanks so
We're dealing with it, and it's damn serious. It's not a hoax. Okay, well, at least you can take that from Jerry Brown as worthwhile, worth watching. Before I finish the show, there are two quick things I want to let you know about. First, in terms of all the live comments, sometimes I think last week I got over 1,400 live comments during the live show, and then they all disappear, so no one gets to read them when this becomes a recorded show. And I posted on the YouTube help forum along with a bunch of other people who were having the same problem, and someone from YouTube answered. Turns out it's not a bug, it's a feature. This is how YouTube intended it to be, that no one can see these comments or they disappear after the live show. But I saved them all, and last week I hooked it up to the Patreon page, and I'll do the same thing within a couple hours. If anyone wants to read all the live comments, or any people who were here live want to look back through the conversation, I'll have a little RTF file where you can scroll through them, and I will at least save them, even if YouTube won't fix that bug, even though many people won't fix that feature, even though a lot of people have asked about it. Also, before I end, I want to let you know that I am going to make some edited, produced videos, at least one this week, that will be added to the Fox News Bias playlist. I found a couple topics, one on the Ban the Box campaign, some really dishonest framing of the Ban the Box issue on a recent Fox News program, and then this attack on this anti-atheist discrimination ordinance in Madison, Wisconsin. That was really egregious, from the same Fox and Friends program. Hopefully I'll get to that second one. I'll definitely have the first one up sometime this week, so look for that. And next Sunday, even though there's this ACLU conference, I think I will still be doing the Sunday show around the same time, maybe slightly delayed, 6:30 p.m. Pacific, maybe 7 p.m. Pacific. I'll post a link a couple hours before to let you know when the show should be starting. And thanks to the 135 or so of you who joined me live. I'll be saving your comments, like I said, and there'll be a link down in the video description and in the liberal viewer comment that gets posted in the comment sections of the recorded show. That link will be there within a couple hours. And until my next upload, I guess I'll be seeing all of you around the internet.